Hi, everyone. I am Kayla Jones, and this is...
I'm River Navaille.
Oh, pronouns.
Yeah.
Yes, and I use she, her pronouns.
And I use they, them pronouns.
Yeah, so we want to get into who we are and what we do. So you want to read our mission statement?
Sure.
Okay.
So first off, welcome to our very first episode of Collectivize Monterey County live at Wave Street Studios. Our first episode for January is going to focus on the topics of self-care as a radical act, as well as anti-capitalism as a form of creating and supporting our community.
Right.
So a little bit about what we do. So Collectivize Monterey County started as a group on Facebook, but what we are is a group both in the virtual space and in meat space, as you can see here, IRL. And it's a group for people of color in Monterey to be able to trade material and immaterial goods and services, support our communities, have our needs met outside of capitalism, and reject traditional capitalist values.
Right. And we say that the goal is to address income inequality locally, support local people of color, and heal our communities. And so a lot of people say, like, well, you know, how does broadcast fit into that, and how do like community events fit into that? And so we really want to stress and emphasize that it's important to fill yourself up with good events. It's not always just about getting out there on the front lines and protesting. There are other ways that you can practice direct action work with events like these.
Yeah, and we believe that one of the most important elements of direct action is taking care of the people and communities who are doing the work, right?
Right.
And so that's why we decided to have our first episode focus on self-care, is because the burnout is real when you're fighting injustice and oppression.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it feels like there's not much of an effect that we can have, but by supporting each other and taking care of ourselves first and foremost, we can continue to support the work that needs to be done in the fight against all forms of oppression.
Right, and so on our group and on our page, we have some of our values, and so we'll take turns and explain a few of them. So when we say reject capitalism, a lot of people hear that as like we reject business and we reject buying and selling, stuff like that. That's not exactly what we mean, because even outside of capitalism, you would still have commerce, and people would still trade goods and services and things like that. So we mean rejecting capitalism as like rejecting the oppressive structures that allow capitalism to exist in the way that it does.
Right. Like a free market is really a powerful way of, creating competition and keeping the economy in healthy balance. But the way that capitalism kind of continues evolving is, we all know, like the wealthy get wealthier and the poor stay poor and get poorer. And capitalism at its heart is, I don't know if you would agree, but it means one person or group of people maintains control of resources and access to that. And then the rest of us have to trade our labor or our resources in order to gain access to those resources. And some of those resources are like things that should be publicly owned, right? Like water. Here in Monterey County, we have the most expensive water in the nation, we just found. And so there is a movement. You can go to publicwaternow.org and check that out. But
please do check that out. Okay, and then you want to...
So yes, we reject capitalism. Our next value is that we reject homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and ace erasure. And so I think most of us know what homophobia is, right? Not necessarily a fear of gay people, but the active dismissal and sometimes hatred of... And violence towards gay people, transphobia being towards transgender people. And then biphobia is just the slightly more subtle prejudice against bisexual people for either being like too greedy or not being able to
choose or
decide. And then ace erasure is also the erasure of people who are asexual and don't experience sexual attraction at all or only on a small level or a spectrum, and that often gets left out of the larger conversation and discourse.
Right. Rejects racism. That's pretty much everybody knows what that means, but things also like cultural appropriation and like not recognizing African American vernacular English as a real dialect, things like that. So a little deeper into that.
Right, and besides just racism, like in comments or offhand remarks, racism as an institutional
and as a system
that continues oppression.
Right.
We also reject sexism, so the same thing, and sexism against specifically feminine people includes trans women big time, and sexism has patriarchy tied in there, and that negatively affects people of all genders.
Right. And we reject hetero cis patriarchy. Hetero, everybody knows what hetero means. Cis meaning, you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. And then patriarchy, I think everybody knows what that means too. So basically we're rejecting a system that was created by white cis men and continues to only support white cis men.
Right. We also reject Islamophobia, the fear of Muslim folks, and the the Muslim ban, and just the general assumption that if you are a Muslim immigrant, that you have terrorist values, which is really, really damaging.
Right. We reject fat phobia. I don't know if we want to expand more on that, or
just body positive.
All bodies are good bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
We reject poor shaming, which ties into many things. Like poor people's decisions are often really highly criticized. Like maybe you are poor, but you have an iPhone, right? And so people are like, well, why would you spend your money on that? You should be saving that. What people choose to spend their money on is their own choice.
Right.
And having an iPhone and saving, whatever, few $100s by using a flip phone instead isn't actually gonna get you out of poverty.
Right.
Poverty is a continued cycle. And so another factor of poor shaming is when people in poverty are blamed for being in poverty, as though, if only they had gone to college, or if only they worked harder. Poor people work really hard as it is. So we reject poor shaming.
Yeah. We reject class reductionism, which I don't think it's talked about a lot, but that basically means that I think in a lot of kind of social justice circles, as people move more progressively left and start talking about like democratic socialism and things like that, a lot of times you hear that, like when communism wins or when socialism wins, then there won't be any more racism, there won't be any more sexism. So that would be class reductionism, and we're recognizing that those systems would still exist, those systems would still impact marginalized communities negatively, even without capitalism.
And then we reject ableism, right? Which is the assumption that if you have a disability of some kind, that your inability to access certain spaces or dialogues or conversations. So for example, like for people who are vision impaired or blind, a lot of posts on Facebook with really interesting dialogues going on are actually as images with text. And so if you're using Facebook without that visual aspect, it doesn't translate. You miss a lot. So people are left out of conversations continually. Or even right now, we don't have an ASL interpreter. So, and maybe we can get a transcription and subtitles later on, but I mean, I'd like to just acknowledge that that's a form of ableism.
Yeah, no, definitely.
It's not accessible to people hard of hearing.
Yeah, and after this episode, we're gonna type out everything we said. But because this is kind of a conversational talk and it's not exactly scripted, it was kind of hard to pre-caption this, but that is something that's coming.
Yeah, we'll try to do better in the future.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Move on.
So yeah, that's kind of our mission statement and our values. And we've had a lot of questions recently about what our group is and what we actually do, what Collectivize Monterey County
Which is kind of a moving target.
does. It's a moving target because it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, right.
It's not a dogmatic or hierarchical.
That's okay. We'll caption it, and then everyone will know.
And then
what
everybody
it
will
means.
know what I mean. So it's not like, okay, Kayla and River are gonna decide how this is gonna work.
Yeah.
We want it to unfold organically and come from the members of our group. What are our needs as a community? What do we want to see going on? But primarily, Collectivize Monterey County is a Facebook group that anybody can join. And one of the purposes of Collectivize, or CMC, is to provide physical and immaterial goods, services, fulfilling the needs of specifically people of color in Monterey County.
Right. And when we created Collectivize Monterey County, I think we kind of saw holes, or not, I don't want to say holes, but there are a lot of social justice groups in the county. Very few address the entire county. And then sometimes we would go into spaces where it's like, great, you're not homophobic, you're not sexist, you're not racist, but then there's all these other things that you are, and it's like you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so we wanted people to join our group and know, like, these are our values, these are the things we reject. When you see CMC, when we're at events, things like that, you can understand that while everybody makes mistakes, we're going to try and make this as safe of a place as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. So in the group, you can, if you're a person of color, you can say, hey, I need help with childcare, or like, I need help with groceries this month.
Rides.
Rides. Anything like that. If you're a white member of the group, like myself, we ask that you don't request services, because there's so many other spaces where white people can dominate and have their needs met. And we have to be realistic about the fact that sometimes inclusivity means making spaces specifically for marginalized people. So even though white folks are included, we ask that we only offer our services and goods and not expect an exchange.
Too much space.
Yeah, not take up too much space.
Right. All right, so we want to talk about anti-capitalism supporting community growth?
Sure,
You want to go into that? Cool.
Some examples of work we'd like to do in the future, and work that's being done by other groups, is like using these anti-capitalist values where we provide needs for people without money having to be exchanged. So for example, there are groups in communities with high crime rates and low income inequality who just provide free suits to, for example, young black men, or for transient folks who are homeless or houseless, and that helps them succeed in a real tangible way. Having a suit and a job interview gives you a big leg up. Unfortunately, I feel like it shouldn't.
Yeah, that kind of goes into respectability politics and stuff.
But
we'll later episode.
It's a direct action way of helping individuals get their needs met, like employment.
Right. And Monterey County Families of Color is one of our community partners, and they provide free bikes. They have a sliding scale. They do everything. They're amazing. They do Dads Read at the library. They do these bike classes that my daughter is a part of, and they want it to be accessible to everyone. And another thing that they say on their website is, like, if you come from a more privileged place and you have like money to donate, maybe donate more than I can for a bike, so that it can be distributed fairly.
Sliding scale, so that if you can provide more, that makes up for the folks who can't provide as much.
Right.
And then another big goal of ours is providing education outside of the traditional systems of either public K through 12 education, which I work in a high school, a Title I high school, and the higher education system, which tends to have a lot of really classist elements. Higher education just isn't accessible for everybody, right? Not everybody can go into debt. Not everybody can spend the time and energy that it takes applying for scholarships and grants.
Right.
And not everybody comes from a family that's aware or that has the know-how of applying to college and applying for grants and scholarships.
Right.
So,
and education too can be really traumatic for people under attack, for communities under attack. Like when you're in a college setting, and a lot of times teachers are like, you know, we got to respect everyone's opinion, but if someone's like, gays don't deserve rights, like, do we really have to allow that in like this space? That doesn't. All that does is make it so queer folks in the classroom don't feel like they can participate now. So it can be a traumatic experience, and I know several of my friends that have gone to school and said, okay, peace, like I'm not, I'm out. So, and we really feel that going to college isn't like the be all end all, and you can educate yourself outside of it.
We believe in the future of free higher education for all.
Right.
But right now, since it's not accessible that way, we think that there are more important ways of providing education, because education is such an important and powerful tool for progressing our, social and just our community as individuals and as a whole. Education is super important. So how can we provide education outside of those traditionally inaccessible systems?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And for me personally, I took about a year-long break when I was moving back home from school. And in that break, I was online in like a lot of social justice circles and pages and stuff like that. And then I came back to school, and I'm a sociology major. And even though I missed a year, I was able to jump back in, and I understood the terms, and I could totally participate. And I learned all of that outside of school. So of course, like school, reaffirmed the things that I learned. But you definitely can,
My college education is in music and theater, and so while, especially in theater classes, we talked a lot about social justice values, but most of that education started for me on Tumblr.com,
Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tumblr. I know that everyone's like, oh, Tumblr, social justice warriors, but,
But
it's lit.
The internet is a powerful place to start your education, and so for us as an internet group, we want to provide resources for people to take their education into their own hands.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And I want to move on to Checkins. Something super cool that River does that I had never even thought to do, and since River does this, and now I take it on. And what we do are check-ins, so anytime we hang out, we start with like, how are you doing? Like authentically, honestly.
That's actually one thing that I would actually give credit to Angelica
for.
Yeah? Because one of the times that the three of us hung out, they were like, yeah, let's check in. So
Angelica was one of the original founders with us, and then life happens, but I'm hoping they can join us for a later show.
For future shows, but
yeah.
But yeah, like in my classroom with all my students, I try to regularly, on a semi-weekly basis, let them check in. We do like roses and thorns. Should we do that?
Sure.
You want to share like a rose, since you have this beautiful rose shirt? So a good thing from January, and a thorn, something that's been more difficult?
A rose, I just bought a bunch of adult comic books, graphic novels, and I realized that I was feeling really bad because I love reading, and I didn't really have the time to read as like a thick 500-page novel like I used to and like I'd like to do. So it's like, you know what, I'm gonna read graphic novels, and it's super dope. So I just picked up some from Bookshop Santa Cruz. We need more bookstores here. We need more bookstores. And I honestly, I don't know what a thorn would be. The year's starting out really good. I decided to take the year off from school. I might take like one class in the fall semester, but I was full-time for so long, and then in my personal life with my work and then with my daughter, it was too much. So far this is great.
Good.
Yeah.
That doesn't even sound too thorny. So Rosie month.
Yeah, Rosie month. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of graphic novels, one of my roses is that I'm in a play right now that's based on the graphic novel Fun Home by Alison Bechtel. She's the creator of the Bechtel test, which is the idea that in a piece of media, the basic, most bare minimum requirement for female representation is that there be at least 2 female characters with names who talk to each other about something other than a man. And you wouldn't believe how many films, books, TV shows tend to just fail this repetitively, even when they have female leads.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's one of her main contributions, but she also is a cartoonist, a lesbian cartoonist, and so I get to play her on stage in the musical adaptation of her book, Fun Home, and that's opening in a week and a half, and so that's a rose because it's going really well.
Yeah.
Thorn for me would just be that, well, in December, like towards the end of December, I was able to leave some pretty toxic situations, and with that comes, processing a lot of difficult emotions, but really mostly it's given me the chance to just work on myself more and give myself more care and growth. So I'm doing pretty good too.
Yeah, and I encourage everyone to try and do these check-ins with your friends. I think it makes for more authentic friendships and practicing vulnerability.
And sharing space and check in with yourself too if you need to.
Yeah.
Journal or whatever.
So we wanted to move into the start of 2018, what's new. We'll bounce around a little bit. Do you want to start with the whole cannabis legalization?
Yeah, so starting 2018, lots going on, and one of those things is the legalization of recreational marijuana use, which is really exciting on one hand, because that's something we've been fighting for a long time, and the criminalization of marijuana has a really complicated history involving really racist roots. We were just reading about you want me to?
Yeah. So Kansas State Representative Steve Alford made a comment saying that cannabis shouldn't be legalized because the DNA of black people, we can't handle it, which is like very high-key eugenics, kind of. Yeah, and something I do want to make a point that I don't know if people are aware, I think a lot of people aren't aware, but I really try to say cannabis because I didn't know that the roots of saying marijuana had really xenophobic roots, and back in the day during the Reefer Madness stuff, white people were like, oh, look at those, black people and Mexicans with the marijuana, and it sounded exotic, and it scared the white people.
They preferred to use the term marijuana in the 30s when they were first pushing for prohibition of marijuana. And when we say that, let's be clear, it's criminalization, right?
Yeah.
It's being able to arrest and detain people who use marijuana, which at that time it was largely used by Mexican, Latinx, and black folks, but also white people. But yeah, even the way that they branded marijuana was like supposed to sound more foreign, supposed to sound more Spanish.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a eugenics thing, like it drove people crazy or whatever.
Yeah.
So
I know everyone was really happy about Prop 64, and now we have, legal cannabis and stuff. I had several problems with it though, and I wasn't sure how I was going to vote or what I was going to do until pretty much the day of. And now in the aftermath, it's just interesting because this whole, I think it's like up to 32 or 34% tax, which I thought was supposed to be just recreational at first, and it turns out that tax hits medical patients as well. Yeah, and so
it ends up making it less accessible for people who need it for medical purposes.
Right, and I almost want to be like, can we just go back? Like, just get a card, just go to the doctor. I'm sure, trying to survive under capitalism, we all have our stuff.
It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I think that Prop 64 definitely had good sides and bad sides, but overall I feel like we're pretty happy about it. But the next thing that needs to happen is forgiving people who have marijuana
restorative justice.
Restorative justice for people who've been jailed, people who have continued marks on their record or whatever for marijuana usage. Now that it's legal, it should be legal even retrospectively.
Yeah. And also part of restorative justice is like something that's super disappointing is when you go up and down, I mean everywhere kind of that it's legal, but really in California, who owns the dispensaries, who has historically been locked up, and now they're all owned by like white people.
Who's profiting.
Yeah, who's now profiting while there are still black people and Latino people in prison. I don't know how that's right. It's not. So that's part of something. And talking to your state senators and your state assembly members and say you need to do more. This isn't right. So
Let's talk
Also-
about what else has been going on this month, unless you wanted to
Yeah.
finish up.
No, totally. I was going to move into the Women's March
Yeah.
because Riley, who is here actually, asked us a question on our group. We took a few questions prior to this. And so we want to talk about the Women's March that just happened. There were a lot of critiques and some shocking stuff that happened. I don't know if you saw that at one of the Women's March, I think this was in Harlem, they put one of the pink pussy hats on the statue of Harriet Tubman. And it's like, really? Really? I mean, so I think
Can
we
you
saw...
tell us why that is insulting?
Yeah. And then we can go into Riley's question about white feminism. But I mean, for me, I kind of joke about it. I'm like, you know what? Harriet is good with her headscarf. Leave her alone. Like, we don't need to put on the white pussy hat or whatever. But I mean, there's just so many things that's kind of wrong with the pink pussy hat thing.
Right. So
we can just go back and forth. I don't know if we want to list everything.
we could, but for giving context. So for the pink pussy hat to be a thing, it's okay with me that it exists.
Yeah.
I think it's a reaction to the fact that our commander-in-chief is okay with grabbing people by the pussy, and I think we need to be like, pussy grabs back or whatever. I think that's fine. However, when it becomes the central icon for a movement that's supposed to represent women,
Right.
It's leaving out women who don't have pussies, don't have vaginas.
Yeah.
It's leaving out people whose vaginas aren't necessarily pink.
Right.
And it's reinforcing that like pink is a representation for all women. You know, this pink and blue gender binary. It just kind of continues. I don't know.
I think it's
separating
okay
us.
for if you personally want to wear the pink pussy hat, like more power to you. But I think what's harmful is when that gets assigned to the women's march movement and this kind of like Me Too movement. When you look at the pink pussy hat and you're like, oh, they're for women's rights. When it's like there was a lot of like trans exclusionary feminism going on at these marches, and a lot of women of color were being silenced. And I guess part of that silence was, you know, Black women, when we saw the pink hat on Harriet Tubman, we're like, you just have been completely missing the point. Like, you, again, are, I don't even want to say clueless. It's almost like just, like, disregard the critiques that we've had of the movement. So to go to Riley's question, or Riley's comment kind of said, white feminism, it's an issue I feel gets swept under the rug all the time. So do you want to explain what white feminism means a little bit?
Okay, yeah. So white feminism, its opposite being intersectional feminism, I suppose, is the brand of feminism where white women lead with, okay, here's these issues for women, right? So like reproductive justice, hugely important.
Equal pay.
Equal
For
pay,
work.
again, hugely important. You know, fighting sexual harassment and equality in the workplace. However, when a Black woman comes in and says, okay, well, here's an issue that specifically Black women face, or when queer or trans women come in and say, okay, here's an issue that we specifically face, some white feminists are quick to say, okay, but that's a separate issue. That's a different issue. That's a trans issue. That's
Or saying it's divisive.
Right. What we have to remember is that every single person has different intersections of identity. So you can be a woman and have all these things that women are affected by affect you, but you may also be trans. And so you're going to have a whole separate set of situations affecting you, but they're not really separate, because where your identities intersect is where you are affected by, you know, multiple
Systems
types of oppression that kind of, you know, build upon each other.
And so I would say white feminism is kind of just looking at white women's issues and kind of ignoring everything else, or
putting everything else on the back burner.
Yeah,
almost.
and we'll get to that.
Yeah, like
we'll get to that.
like when all, you know, when women have the rights, then we'll focus on Black women's rights.
Right.
Which is something that historically has been part of the feminist movement for a long time, including women's suffrage. Susan B. Anthony was
It
racist.
said something like, I'll cut off my right arm before I let Black women vote, or something. Like, woo, no, that's... Yeah, and we still see that today, and so it's important for us to recognize that moving forward. Do you want to, I think we should maybe take a break for
Yeah.
poetry?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
so
you
we've
wanna-
covered some of our topics. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about one of our main themes of the episode, which is radical self-care. But I'd like to introduce a fabulous poet and good friend of mine, Rashana Blake. She's a performance poet and the author of The Gifted Quiet, a collection of poems and performance words. She is a pure light poet, leading workshops to illuminate the voice of new and emerging writers, and she's an educating teacher with her Lost in Translation bilingual poetry project that was developed during her AmeriCorps Literacy Service year. She has an MFA from the City College of New York, where she lectured in the theater department for several years and served as a judge for the Poetry Outreach Program. She's a frequent judge of new artistic expressions and is currently working on her next collection of poetry while living in Marina. Her latest workshops, readings, and performances can be found on the Pure Light Productions website, which is www.purelight.com. However, light is spelled L-I-T, so PURELIT.com. And without any further ado, let's welcome Rashana Blake.
I so enjoyed the just listening. It was like really nice and nice to my ears. It really was. And I was trying to figure out what poems to read because I realized this is conversational. So I'm going to also just be conversational. And instead of being like, well, I'm going to read this poem and then I'm going to read this poem, I'm just like, what is being led in terms of what I heard today? And so I'm sort of changing things to just be conversational in my approach as well with you. I want to say PUR, the pure lit part of it. And why is that? Because people always ask me that. I'm big into grammar. I'm big into your voice. And there is a long I. So the little dash is on the I. And it's a good conversation starter for my geek grammar girl. I get to talk to people about the long I. So like there's an audience here that I can talk to about the long I and how that is important because the long I is inclusive. You know, so this conversation was about inclusion, and that's what the long I is about. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read you, well, Martin Luther King Day just passed, and Women's History Month is coming up, and also Black History Month is coming up. You know, it's a really, really charged time. And I had the fortunate experience of knowing Rosa Parks as a child. And so the first poem I want to read to you is about just meeting Rosa Parks and meeting women who have the spirit of Rosa Parks and what that meant to me as a young girl. So the first poem I'm going to read to you is The Meeting. And I think Meeting River was like that. And meeting, you know, it's just that spirit of service, that spirit of giving people another chance to express themselves, right? So, okay, I know this is like a long introduction, but Rosa Parks, I have to say this because people always think Rosa Parks died when Martin Luther King died, and no. Like she lived a full life after that of service to youth and to social issues. And so the Rosa Parks that I'm talking about, it's important for me to say, is the Rosa Parks that lived in the 90s, that Rosa Parks. So I met her then. The Meeting. I was 7, Rosa Parks, and my spirit saluted you the moment you walked into our living room. Excited, I refused sleep, begging to miss curfew and lie at your feet. Grace removed the pedestal, and I fell in love with the person behind scenes of the Montgomery boycott. Fame faded into humanity. You were like grandma, and I one of your girls, with a hushed laughter tickling my little world. I held on to the memory of you cooking with us, and for the rest of your life, saw you and made no fuss. The Meeting. Thank you. Okay. So Rosa Parks, and this is important to this reading of this poem, founded the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development. And it was founded by Miss Parks and Miss Steele to help youth reach their full potential. One of its premier programs is the Path to Freedoms Tour. Since it's kind of conversational, I'll say that I'm going to read the poem. In Flight. Eternal friends, Martin, Malcolm, and Mammy speak. Martin is frustrated, calls racism a disease. Malcolm ponders the rippling effects of HIV as they huddle around me in reverie. Rosa, Rosa, have another cup of tea. Mammy, Emmett Till's mother, sweetly says, while we reminisce about earthly days. Emmett walks in, quick pace, throws his arms around my waist. Emmett, I exclaim. Mammy smiles. Beautiful is the face of her child. Aunt Rosa, he says, is it true today? People use the N-word in a friendly way? He wants to settle a long-standing debate with my beloved Institute son, Feluke, who drowned on a Pathways to Freedom ride. Feluke greets me with hugs. I flutter with pride. Then drumbeats open heaven for me. Raymond, I blush. He gently strokes my face, holds my hand, and pulls me into his space. So Rosa Parks was married, y'all. She had a husband that wasn't Martin Luther King, and so that's what that is. It's about what might have happened when she went home, and who she might have seen. And so those of you who don't know some of these people, like Martin or Malcolm or Mammy, Emmett Till's mother, good. I am a lecturer. Go do some homework and figure out who these people are, and that's that. And so I'm really missing Rosa Parks personally, but also I think we need more Rosa Parks spirits right now, and so I'm missing her on so many levels. And so I'm going to move from that section to sort of conversations that I have in my classroom. Again, like I've changed it up just to sort of tell you a little bit about what I've noticed. So I have a section called Morning Psalms. I'm moving from Remembering Rosa to Morning Psalms, and this is called Nation. I basically would read a psalm. So difference, my father's Muslim growing up, and my mother was Christian. And all I had to do was believe in God. That was the whole deal. And so, and I could make a choice. I thought, of course, that's not really a choice, right? I have to believe in God, but I didn't have to follow a particular religion. And this psalm my grandmother had a huge impact on me, and she loves the Psalms, and I actually love the Psalms. I love the psalmist. And so this is a poem based on the Psalms, and it comes from Psalms 86:9 for anyone who's interested in looking up that, psalm to see how I got to this poem. The title of the poem is Nation, and it takes place after me asked a lot of questions while at college. I went to Syracuse University. A lot of times I was the only Black girl in the class. Nation, naked and neutral in humanity, until a silly sidekick paints a picture of profanity that locks me in color division. Science proved the first beings were people of color, she says. True, but what's the meaning? Does it keep your humanity intact? I need no reminder that I'm Black. Every day the mirror tells me that I am aching in a nation with too many color creations. I'd rather live my life like a rainbow, that in a dedication to the past. I want to move forward in a flow where I let go, free to really see. Color does not indicate destiny. It has no value to open minds, imagination, and flights of fancy. that's what God told me. So I'm going to end there. Right? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Roshana.
much,
Yes.
Roshana. Thank you.
Thank you. So we started a little bit late, so we're going to go a little bit past 12.
Yeah, we'll go till like 12:15.
So, yeah. So now the second part of the show, before the band gets on, we're going to dig into what we mean by self-care and radical softness and how we practice it, and then we'll answer a question from the Facebook group. Keen Save will perform, and then we'll close with a blurb about upcoming events.
Great. Great. Okay, so what do we even mean by self-care? Should we start with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so self-care started in the disability community as a term because there's such a tendency for us to ignore our own needs as we struggle through our daily lives, working and dealing with whatever kind of family stress, work stress, all that. And we often don't leave even small amounts of time for ourselves to recharge and reset and make sure that our needs, both physical and emotional, are met.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And then we want to explain radical softness and what that means. And like going back to how we said we do the check-ins, so we have deeper, more authentic friendships. Radical softness, you want to quote we want to give credit to the creator of that term.
Yeah, the person who coined the term radical softness is a online blogger named Laura Mathis, Laura, Lora. You can look them up on Instagram and just Google. But so they coined the term radical softness as a weapon. So we think of softness, vulnerability, femininity as sometimes weaknesses, right? Things that limit us. And Laura Mathis and then this, whole community kind of flips that around in the attempt to use radical softness, right? The ability to be sad when you're sad, letting yourself be tired when you're tired, letting yourself be vulnerable about your own issues. And it's especially important in the mentally ill, femme and queer communities, and then of course communities of color, so that we can all grapple with our own intersectional identities and still make sure that our humanity, I guess, is intact. And that by being vulnerable and soft, it's actually a radical act. It's actually creating space for others to do the same, I think is the most important.
Right, and what I love, Laura Mathis said that radical softness is the idea that unapologetically sharing your emotions is a political move and a way to combat the societal idea that feelings are a sign of weakness. Yeah, so I'm very femme. I'm the femme half of this show. Yeah, and it's so funny, my friend likes to say when she's being emotional, like, oh, I'm so femme, it hurts. And so yeah, we're just all about, I've been embracing more like, I guess, like growing up and being in high school, you're like, oh, I'm not like those other girls. Or, I get along with boys better, because you're taught that everything about being a girl is something that you should hide and be ashamed of.
And internalized misogyny.
Right. And so being radically soft and, having, that's for everybody, but especially for me in my role and navigating this world as a femme, it is kind of going up against internalized misogyny and toxic masculinity, and recognizing that being soft is also a strength. And yeah.
And it's definitely not something that's just for femme people. Right. If I were to put myself on scale, I'd say futch.
I love that.
Femme and butch, kind of like right in the middle. I identify as non-binary trans, and for me, you know, that sometimes I have to grapple with, okay, does that stem from internalized misogyny? Like, do I hate the parts of myself that are feminine? Is that what I'm trying to shed myself of? And no, not really. I'm mostly trying to shed myself of the gender binary and gender roles, which I think are inherently oppressive. And, you know, free myself up to present and identify however I want. But femininity is something that all of us have to some degree, right? Even the most butch of like cisgender men should feel able to experience emotions and qualities that maybe are typically associated with the feminine. And femininity doesn't equal frailness.
Right.
Femme ain't frail is what we like to say.
I love that. Yeah. And part of that too, going into, I mean, it's kind of on the line of radical softness, but more so, I guess, about my own like internalized misogyny is, you know, people really police the way that women and femmes communicate, and you know, we have upspeak, and we end all of our sentences with a question, and we say like a lot.
That question.
And you know, we kind of judge it by saying like that's unprofessional, or you're not clear, you're not able to communicate. And it's like, well, what standard are we using to say that women can't speak this way? Is it because men happen to like burst into conversations like the Kool-Aid man? Like that, you know, is it, it seems like that's how, you know, they communicate more often than not. So I used to totally be like one of those grammar people and say, don't say like, and don't you upspeak. And now I'm just like, you know, like,
yeah, because
be yourself.
So I'm a grammar nerd too, like Roshana. I studied a little bit of linguistics in college and found it super fascinating. But there's a branch of linguistics that's prescriptive, right? That prescribes how we're supposed to speak. You know, these are the rules of grammar. You can't split infinitives. You can't say like in the middle of your sentence. And then the opposite side of that is descriptive linguistics that describes the way that people already speak. And for me, while, you know, when I'm writing and when I'm speaking, I like to use grammar that I think is clean and efficient and gets the meaning across. But as long as what we're saying communicates meaning, it's correct, right? And it ties into racist roots as well, like you said about African American Vernacular English, or AAVE, being criticized as unprofessional or uneducated.
You know, a perfect example of that, really quick before we get into the question, is Cardi B, that I love. Cardi B is Black, super femme, and she made this video and she like slammed the United Nations, calling them imperialistic, and like and pointing out how they tend to not really give aid to brown and Black countries. And she did it using African American Vernacular English, which is also known as Ebonics for people that don't know. And a lot of people were like, "What? She doesn't even know what she's talking about." But no, it was very clear. And you know, part of that is also going into like kind of code switching. Like, she was speaking to her community. She wasn't speaking to the 45-year-old old white male Fox News anchor, right? So she was communicating directly to us. And so I think that goes into the way women speak and having to code switch in certain situations.
It's dismissed, right?
Yeah.
It's dismissed unless we speak the way that authoritative male speakers speak.
Right.
And then even when we do that, when we try to speak in like kind of a low voice, like vocal fry is what's also criticized. Like like the Kardashian, like is totally just dismissed.
So you can't win.
Yeah, you can't win.
So just
that's
you know,
kind of a
be
tangent,
yourself.
though.
Yeah.
Before we get to our question, I just wanted to say that another big aspect of self-care that comes also from the disability community is the term spoons. So
I love that.
Yeah. So spoons is an arbitrarily assigned term for a unit of measurement for energy, right? So like, depending on yourself, depending on whatever kinds of ability and disability you may be balancing, you start your day with a certain number of spoons. So let's say
like 12 spoons or something like that.
You know, it could be a different amount every day too. Some days you might have less. So let's say I wake up with 10 spoons in the morning, and it takes a spoon for me to make breakfast, and then it takes a spoon for me to catch the bus and deal with the bus driver or whoever. and then I have to work, and that uses up spoons. And so then at the end of the day, I may feel a responsibility to go onto the internet and do some education for myself, do some unlearning, do some communication, do some spreading the word. However, I may be out of spoons that day. And that, I think, leads us perfectly into a question from one of our group members,
Yes.
Sedgwick.
Yes, asked, how about the not always, but oh so often, expectations of self-sacrifice as evidence of dedication within activist groups, which interrupts everyone's self-care, but disproportionately and negatively affect disabled community members who often require more time-consuming and expensive means of self-care for the same situation.
Right.
So I think we do want to preface this by saying, I don't know if River identifies with the...
Well, I am able-bodied, and I really don't want to claim to speak for the disabled community.
Right.
I do have bipolar disorder, which often disables me from doing some things.
Yeah, so I think
But
we
we're
just
both
wanted
relatively able. I guess.
Yeah. When we answer the question, we just wanted to say we don't want to speak over people that are not abled or part of like the whole disability justice movement. So we're going to answer this from our perspective. Do you want to start?
Yeah, so we're so expected to sacrifice ourselves. I think Merak is totally right there in saying that, to prove our dedication to whatever movements we're fighting for. And I think that when there are such moments of that it's imperative that we take action immediately, maybe I'll use a spoon for that, and skip something else in my routine. But for example, the Women's March that happened a few weekends ago, I really, really wanted to attend the LGBT and women's rally that was happening in Watsonville, organized by the Rebel Lunas.
Another community partner.
And I wasn't able to because it would have totally drained me and wore me out, and I had too much to do for my students and the theater program that I run at Seaside High School. And so I had to make that choice. But I did kind of feel like, oh no, people are going to call me a hypocrite because I'm so impassioned about showing up and doing the work. But in that time, I couldn't do the work. And I think if I ignored my own self-care, then would I have been able to be here today?
Right.
I don't know.
And for me, last year, it was like Trump got elected, and then all of a sudden I had something like political or some protest to do every weekend, some stuff at Window on the Bay during the week. And I committed to going to all of these events, and I felt like I had to so that other people would be, like if we all decided to take the day off, then who would show up? So I think there's a lot of pressure. And I got really burned out, which is why I'm taking kind of this year to take a break from school, and I'm not attending as many protests as I was, which I feel very okay with because we're doing Collectivize. And I really wanted to be able to focus on our group and the activities that we plan for the community. That makes me feel good in a way that's not exhausting. I mean, sometimes it can be, but
Totally, yeah. And that's okay, and then take your rest.
Yeah.
But, again, to acknowledge that it does disproportionately affect the disabled community.
Yeah.
And so we have to remember that one way we all can ensure that people with disabilities aren't totally exhausted and worn out by participating in activism is making events accessible, right? Because if we had an ASL interpreter here, then somebody who was hard of hearing wouldn't have to use as much energy to, lip read
or wait for our captions.
Or wait for our captions, yeah. So if a protest is set up somewhere that's not accessible for wheelchairs, then if a wheelchair user still really wants to be there, they're going to have to go through all this extra work and labor, having people help them or whatever their needs may be, and that's going to wear them out more. So how can we make everything accessible to every single person without them having to exhaust themselves without
Right.
them having to take that labor upon their own backs.
Right, which again, going back to our values, when we say we reject ableism, that's something that in any event that we do or anywhere that we're tabling, we really want to make sure that people know that CMC is keeping that in mind and that we want to be as accessible as possible. So.
And even when we do make mistakes and we're not perfect, we have to hold ourselves accountable.
Yeah,
and I
and
just
call us
wanted to credit again Laura Mathis's work in Radical Softness. Right before we get to our performers, I just want to read 3 quick poems that they wrote. So first is, steep your self-love in accountability and forgiveness. The second is, dedicate yourself to a life of unlearning, critical reflection, and growth. And finally, be soft with yourself while navigating your mistakes, while also committing to learning from them. And I really like those just because they show both sides of forgiving yourself as well as learning from those mistakes.
Nice.
So you want to introduce our
Yes, so I'm super excited about the band that we have here. We have Quinsabe. Quinsabe is a cumbia reggae rock fusion, or cumbia callejera. Just make fun of me later for not being able to pronounce it. That's fine. It's a band with members from Los Angeles and the Salinas Valley. Their sophomore album entitled Mujer. Yeah, all right, good job. Will be released in early March. Produced by internationally recognized Latin Grammy nominee Eric Canelles of Allison, and platinum album selling Sam Pura, amongst other well-respected producers like Monterey Peninsula local Ben Rossett, Mino Valdez, Russell Rodriguez, and others. Quinsabe has been existing as a musical entity since 2010, steadily evolving styles and members over the past 8 years. From a solo project by More Map Records artist Carlos Quin Cortez to the cumbia callejera group it is today. Quinsabe is set to release their second album in 2018, and they have performed in cities throughout California and internationally in Mexico City. And without further ado, Quinsabe.
All right. Can you got an 8 in Spanish? All right, high class. Condado de Monterey, California, en puntos intermedios. Cucuy, ¿quién sabe? Ella le gusta de lo bueno. Todo high class, high class, high class, high class. Ella usa puro Armani, puro Gucci, Versace. Todo high class, puro high class, todo high class. High class, que la vieron en un baile, me dijeron, bailando high class, todo high class, que estaba muy pegadita, de la mano agarradita, con un vato high class, novelita high class, esos cursis no me gustan a mí. Raja. Navegando para poderla tener, poderla querer, poderla querer, poderla querer. Ella no puede mirar en su estado mental, Solo piensa en subir, la vida vivir, piensa en subir, la vida vivir. Y yo sigo escribiendo todo lo que voy sintiendo, para poder sobresalir, la vida vivir, podré sobresalir, la vida vivir. Las canciones que he cantado para poderla querer, pero ella no me quería a mí. la vieron. En un baile me dijeron, bailando high class, high class, high class, high class, que estaba muy pegadita, de la mano agarradita, con un vato high class, carita high class, novelita high class, esos cursis no me gustan a mí. Gracias. So we're Quinsabe. Hi, everybody. Thanks for, hello to everybody who's tuning in live at home, everywhere. We're Quinsabe. If you guys want to catch more of us, you guys can find us. We're going to be doing some shows with Fayuca from Phoenix, Arizona, February 8th at Mo's Alley in Santa Cruz, California. And then February 9th at Planet Gemini in Monterey, here in town. Yeah. This song's called Luz de Neon.
Debajo de la luna sobre un techo iluminado de mil luces de neón. Después de todo yo estaba bien tomado y como un alacrán quise darte un agarrón, pero no fue como yo pensé, no fue así y por eso yo te ofendí, pero no fue como yo pensé. No fue así y ahora no te tengo aquí.
Y ahora en adentro y tuyo se siente real, se siente como un vicio que no puedo negar. Oh, tu amor es una enfermedad y me pegó, pero como que me gustó y no me quiero aliviar, quiero sufrir más. No sé cómo sentirme si a mi lado no estás, oh, si a mi lado no estás.
Yo te besé debajo de la luna sobre un techo iluminado de mil luces de neón. Después de todo yo estaba bien tomado y como un alacrán quise darte un agarrón, pero no fue como yo pensé, no fue así y por eso no te tengo aquí, pero no fue como yo pensé, no fue así y ahora solo pienso en ti.
Thank you very much. We want to thank CMC for having us out here, Collectivize Monterey. Thank you for having us for your inaugural, did I say that? Inaugural podcast. We want to thank Wave Street Studios for having us here, and all you guys for coming out and be here supporting. Yeah, and David. And Mario and Maddie, who couldn't be here today. All right.
We're going to leave you with this one. This one's called Fuga, and you can find it on iTunes or anywhere where they sell music digitally.
Sauce.
bailando en una fiesta, pero se quiso escapar. Mientras echaba la fuga, yo con otra me puse a platicar. Estaba bailando en una fiesta, pero se quiso escapar. Mientras echaba la fuga, yo con otra me puse a bailar. Si tú te vas, pues yo me quedo y quizás nos veremos luego. Si tú te vas, pues yo me quedo y quizás nos veremos luego. Si tú te vas a volar y yo me pongo a bailar. Si tú te vas a volar y yo me pongo a bailar. Estaba bailando en una fiesta, pero se quiso escapar. Mientras echaba la fuga, yo con otra me puse a bailar. Estaba bailando en una fiesta, pero a mí me fue bien. Mientras echaba la fuga, yo encontré un nuevo querer. Si tú te vas, pues yo me quedo y quizás nos veremos luego. Si tú te vas, pues yo me quedo y quizás nos veremos luego. Si tú te vas a volar y yo me pongo a bailar. Si tú te vas a volar y yo me pongo a bailar. La fuga, ella se escapó, se fue con otro amor y aquí me dejó. La fuga, tú sudas mi culpa, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga, tú sudas mi culpa, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga, tú sudas mi culpa, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga, tú sudas mi culpa, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga, tú sudas mi culpa, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga, mi culpa, tú sudas, nunca regresó, no, 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 no. La fuga. Boom.
Our show and for
Thank
being
you
here.
so much.
Yes, this is so great. Beautiful music. So to close the show, we're just going to give a little blurb about some events coming up. And okay, so next month we're going to try and do this show on the last Tuesday of every month. Next month will not be at 11 a.m. though. That time is to be announced. But next month's episode, the first part's going to be on Black queer identity. And we're going to have some awesome guest speakers. And then the second part of the episode is going to be about Black representation in films and why that matters, because Black Panther is coming out, and I'm definitely going to see that at least 4 times. And another thing that we're doing that we want to announce is we are currently accepting donations and raising money to send Black community members to go see the movie. We have raised enough to send every single member of the NAACP, Monterey County NAACP Youth Council to see the movie, and also some people in the community. So if you are Black, come to our group on Facebook, Collectivize Monterey County, to redeem a ticket. And yeah, we're accepting donations.
Yeah.
Also, we have the Facebook page to direct people to the group. So all the good stuff is going to be in the group.
Yeah, so you can like our page, Collectivize Monterey County, but from there, join our group, because the group is where everything happens. That's where the discussion is. That's where
Events are posted.
Events and offerings are posted. And also, ISOs, or people post an in search of, and so you may have something you could provide for someone, or at least an answer for somebody. Yeah, so we've got the Black Panther tickets coming up, but we want to say we're accepting donations also to pay our artists who we have here today. So we think it's really important to
pay artists for their work.
Pay artists for their work,
Yeah.
and to feature the work of artists of color. But, art is labor, and even though we don't always think of it as like a product, it's really important to be able to sustain the work that artists do so that we can continue having a vibrant society and culture, which needs art at its heart on every level.
Right. You have an event coming up?
Okay, so a couple events coming up. The Direct Action Monterey Network, or DAM for short, they have a Bay Area group called Redneck Revolt coming down to visit, and they're actually a group focused on anti-racism, anti-classism, and they're a community defense group, and they'll be having a workshop discussing their tactics on February 9th at 8 p.m. at Old Capitol Books in Monterey. Next month, every month, the last Sunday of the month at Palenque Arts, which is in Seaside at King School on Broadway. Palenque Arts is a multicultural arts center, and we have an open mic there that I host. And it's a really cool space to either come out and listen or come out and share your work. So that'll be 6 to 8 p.m. the last Sunday of every month.
And then every Friday at 2 at the Chinatown Learning Center in Salinas, the Salinas and Monterey County Homeless Union meets. So go to their meetings. And then I guess just to close, we want to say thank you so much to Wave Street Studios.
Yes.
They are awesome. They said bring the content and we'll take care of it, and they really have, so thank you. And thank you to our community partners. We are partnered with Direct Action Monterey Network, Revolunas in Watsonville, Salinas Women of Colors, Families of Color Monterey County, and Whites for Racial Equity. Yes. And we hope that you can join us next month.
Yeah, so join our group, join our conversation.
Tell
we'll
us
have
what
ways
you want.
for you to donate if you can, either for the Black Panther movie tickets for Black community members and kids, or for this project so that we can keep having really awesome, rad artists of color come on and we can support their work.
Yeah.
And with that,
That's
thank
a wrap.
you, everyone.
Yeah.
Go in peace and justice. And we
In
love
solidarity. Yeah.
You. Yay.
Yay, good go. Good. Woo.